I never planned to break my family apart with a 3-inch binder. Standing in my apartment that morning, staring at the leather-bound collection of receipts, bank statements, and transaction records that documented 5 years of financial sacrifice, I wondered if I was making a mistake. The binder represented $61,000 of my life, money that had quietly flowed from my accounts to my family's needs. While I lived in a cramped studio apartment with secondhand furniture and meals that consisted primarily of ramen and canned soup, my fingers traced the neat tab dividers: mortgage payments, car loans, medical bills, Sierra's expenses, each one a chapter in a story no one wanted to hear, each one a silent sacrifice that had been rewritten as my failure to thrive like my younger sister. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother. "Don't forget, dinner at 7. Your father is grilling steaks. Sierra has big news." I knew what the big news was. My cousin had already texted me about Sierra's engagement to Bradley, the investment banker whose family had connections to everyone who mattered in Austin. The dinner was a celebration, one I hadn't been invited to until Dad insisted, according to Uncle Frank. "You're going?" Frank had asked when I called him yesterday, his voice carrying that familiar note of protective concern. "I have to," I'd replied, staring at the binder that had begun as a simple tracking spreadsheet for tax purposes. "Amanda," he'd said, his voice softening, "you don't owe them your presence any more than you owed them your paycheck." But he didn't understand. This wasn't just about money. This was about truth, about finally being seen. I slipped the binder into my tote bag and headed for the door. The drive to my parents' suburban home was a journey I could make with my eyes closed. 27 minutes of highway, followed by the winding roads of River Oaks, where manicured lawns stretched out like green carpets, and houses grew larger with each passing year. Of my parents' social climbing. When I pulled into the circular driveway, Sierra's gleaming white Tesla was already there, parked prominently where visitors couldn't miss it. I parked my 10-year-old Honda behind it. The contrast between our vehicles, a perfect metaphor for the narrative my mother had constructed. Sierra, the successful fashion consultant rising through the ranks, and Amanda, the responsible but unremarkable accountant who just hadn't found her path yet. The front door opened before I could knock. My mother stood there in a designer dress that I recognized from last season's collection, one I had secretly helped pay for when Dad's business hit a rough patch. "Amanda!" she exclaimed, her smile bright but her eyes already assessing me, finding fault with my simple navy dress and minimal makeup. "We were beginning to think you weren't coming." "I said I would," I answered, stepping inside and breathing in the familiar scent of lemon polish and expensive candles. Sierra appeared from the living room, radiant in cream-colored silk that complemented her highlighted hair and spray-tanned skin. The diamond on her left hand caught the light, sending prisms dancing across the wall. "Mandy!" she squealed, using the childhood nickname I'd outgrown a decade ago. "You're here. Did Mom tell you? Bradley proposed at the vineyard last weekend. It was magical." I forced a smile, accepting her hug and the cloud of designer perfume that came with it. "Congratulations, that's wonderful news." My father emerged from his study, silver hair perfectly styled, his casual polo shirt probably costing more than my monthly grocery budget. "There's my responsible one," he said, embracing me with a genuine warmth that made my chest ache. Dad had always been the softer parent, the one who at least acknowledged my contributions, even if he never quite realized their extent. "Hi, Dad. Come on in," he urged. "I'm just about to start the steaks. Bradley's running late. Some work emergency, but he'll be here soon." The kitchen was a showcase of my parents' aspiration. Marble countertops, professional-grade appliances, and the custom cabinets my mother had insisted on installing last year during what I now knew had been a financial crisis. I had covered 3 mortgage payments during that renovation, believing their story about temporary cash flow issues. "Amanda, could you set the table?" my mother asked, already turning away as if the answer was a foregone conclusion. "Use the good china. We're celebrating tonight." I moved to the dining room, where the mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier. As I placed each plate and aligned each fork, I felt the weight of the binder in my tote bag, still sitting by the front door. Part of me wanted to leave it there, to sit through one more dinner of Sierra's spotlight and my shadows. But then I heard my mother's voice from the kitchen. "Sierra, darling, you have to tell Amanda about the wedding venue Bradley's parents are looking at. It's the same place where the Hendersons had their daughter's wedding. You remember, the one in the society pages?" "Oh my God, it's incredible!" Sierra gushed, entering the dining Room with a glass of champagne already in hand. It's booked solid for 2 years, but Bradley's mom made one call and suddenly they had an opening next spring. I nodded, arranging the napkins in perfect triangles. That's lucky. Sierra tilted her head, studying me with a hint of pity in her eyes. You know, Amanda, you should let me introduce you to some of Bradley's friends. I'm sure we could. Find someone nice for you. You just need to, put yourself out there more. The condescension in her voice made my fingers tighten around the silverware. At 32, I was only 2 years older than Sierra, but the way she spoke to me made it sound like decades separated us. I'm focused on my career right now, I replied, the practiced answer sliding out easily. Sierra laughed, the sound like tinkling crystal. Your career? Amanda, you've been at the same accounting firm for years. Don't you want more? Don't you want what I have? Before I could answer, my mother swept in with a flower arrangement for the center of the table. Sierra, don't pressure your sister. Not everyone is meant for the spotlight. She patted my shoulder in what she probably thought was a comforting gesture. Amanda's always been our steady one, the responsible one. The way she said responsible made it sound like a consolation prize. I finished setting the table in silence, listening as Sierra described her upcoming photo feature in a local magazine. My mother's proud exclamations, my father's gentle teasing about having a celebrity in the family. The familiar scene played out like a well-rehearsed play, with each of us in our assigned roles. Only tonight, I was about to go off script. I walked to the front door and retrieved my tote bag, feeling the weight of the binder inside like an anchor. Or maybe it was a lifeline. I wasn't sure anymore. Amanda? My father called from the kitchen. Everything okay? I took a deep breath, clutching the bag to my chest. Yes, I called. Back, my voice steadier than I expected. I'm just getting something I wanted to show everyone. The time for silence was over. Dinner began like a carefully orchestrated symphony, my mother conducting each movement with practiced precision. The steaks were perfectly medium rare. The wine was an expensive Cabernet my father had been saving for a special occasion, and the conversation flowed, exclusively towards Sierra and her engagement. Bradley's family is thinking about flying everyone to Aspen for the rehearsal dinner, Sierra announced, twirling her wine glass between manicured fingers. His father has this amazing chalet there. That sounds wonderful, honey, my mother beamed, reaching across to squeeze Sierra's hand. She was wearing the pearl necklace I'd given her for her birthday 3 years ago, purchased during a rare moment when my bank account wasn't drained by family emergencies. I'd never seen her wear it before tonight. Amanda, my father said, turning to me with genuine interest. How's work going? That promotion you mentioned coming through yet? Before I could answer, my mother interjected. Oh, Richard, let's not talk about work tonight. This is a celebration. She turned to me with a tight smile. Though we're always proud of your stability, dear. I took a sip of wine, feeling the familiar burn of dismissal. Actually, Oh my God, I almost forgot, Sierra interrupted, her eyes wide with excitement. I got the offer for that consulting position with Vogue. It means relocating to New York, but the salary is incredible. My parents erupted in congratulations. My mother actually clapped her hands together like a delighted child. This is what we always knew would happen. Remember when you were little and used to dress up in my clothes? I told Richard then, this one's going places. That's great news, Sierra, I said quietly, wondering how much of her success had been subsidized by my stability. The job she currently held had required an expensive certification program, one that mysteriously appeared on my credit card statement 2 years ago, when my mother borrowed my card for emergency groceries. We'll need to start looking at apartments in Manhattan, my mother continued, already planning as if it were her life unfolding. Richard, didn't your college roommate's son work in real estate in New York? My father nodded, pride evident in his expression. I'll give Jim a call tomorrow. He'll make sure Sierra gets into the right neighborhood. I pushed my food around my plate, the steak suddenly tasting like cardboard. The weight of the binder pressed against my foot where I'd tucked my tote bag under the table. Amanda, Sierra said suddenly, her tone dripping with artificial concern. You're so quiet. Tonight, aren't you excited for me? I met her eyes across the table. Of course I am. You don't sound excited, my mother remarked, her brow furrowing. Is something wrong? The moment stretched between us like a tightrope. I could walk across it carefully, maintaining the balance we'd established years ago. Or I could cut it entirely. I was just thinking about New York, I said slowly. It's an expensive city? Sierra waved her hand dismissively. Bradley and I will manage. Plus, the salary is amazing. And we'll help if needed, my father added, generous as always with promises that increasingly fell on my shoulders to fulfill. Like you helped with Sierra's car? The words escaped before I could reconsider them. The table fell silent. My mother's smile froze in place. What about my car? Sierra asked, confusion evident on her face. My mother recovered quickly. Your father and I helped Sierra with the down payment, Amanda. We've discussed this before. When you were ready for a new car, we offered the same. No, I said quietly. You didn't. I reached down and pulled the binder from my bag, placing it beside my plate. You told me you'd help with the down payment on Sierra's Tesla as a graduation gift, but that's not what happened, is it? My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Amanda, this isn't the time. When is the time, Dad? I opened the binder to a tabbed section labeled Sierra's car. The $20,000 down payment came from my emergency fund. Mom said you were having cash flow problems with the business, that it was just temporary, that you'd pay me back. Sierra's mouth fell open. What are you talking about? Amanda is exaggerating, my mother said sharply, her knuckles white around her wine glass. We borrowed a small amount. $20,000 isn't small, Mom. I pulled out the bank statement and slid it across the table. And it wasn't the first time, and it certainly wasn't the last. My father leaned forward to look at the statement, his face paling. Catherine, you said this money came from our equity line. It was a temporary solution, my mother snapped. Amanda offered to help. After you told me Dad might lose the business, I corrected. After you cried on the phone about possibly losing the house. Sierra was staring at the bank statement, her expression stunned. I had no idea. Of course you didn't, I said, my voice softening slightly when I looked at her. You weren't supposed to know. No one was. I was just doing what I always do, being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who sacrifices so everyone else can shine. Amanda, my mother's voice took on the warning tone she'd used since we were children. You're making a scene over ancient history. This isn't appropriate. Dinner conversation. I turned to another section of the binder. What about the mortgage payments from last year? Is that ancient history too? Or Sierra's student loans? Or the credit card debt that mysteriously appeared in my name? My father's hand trembled as he reached for his wine glass. Catherine, what is she talking about? My mother's face hardened into a mask I'd seen many times before, the expression she wore when her carefully constructed narratives began to crack. Amanda, you're being dramatic. We've always supported both our daughters equally. I laughed, the sound hollow and unfamiliar even to my own ears. Equally? Is that what you call this? I flipped to another section of the binder, pulling out a spreadsheet that detailed 5 years of loans that were never repaid. This isn't about money, my mother insisted, her voice rising slightly. This is about your jealousy. It's always been about your jealousy of Sierra's success. The accusation hit like a physical blow. For years, I'd heard variations of this theme, that my resentment stemmed from envy rather than exploitation, that my concerns were rooted in pettiness rather than genuine harm. Jealousy? I repeated, my voice surprisingly steady. Mom, I paid $9,000 towards Sierra's student loans while working overtime and living with a roommate to make ends meet. I covered 3 mortgage payments when you renovated the kitchen last year. I paid off Dad's medical bills when his insurance didn't cover that specialist. This isn't about jealousy. It's about the truth. Sierra's perfect composure was crumbling. She looked from me to our mother, then down at her engagement ring, which suddenly seemed to weigh heavy on her finger. I didn't know about any of this, she whispered. Of course you didn't, I said. You weren't supposed to know. That was the arrangement. I pay, you succeed, and Mom and Dad get to pretend everything's perfect. That's enough. My mother slammed her hand on the table, making the crystal glasses jump. How dare you turn a celebration into this spectacle? This is exactly why Sierra has flourished while you've stagnated. She focuses on positivity and growth, while you dwell on perceived slights and injustices. Dad was still staring at the bank statements, his face ashen. Catherine, these amounts, these dates, he looked up at me, the realization dawning in his eyes. You paid for my heart medication? The specialist consultations? I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. Mom said the insurance denied the claim and the business was struggling. She said you wouldn't go to the doctor unless the bills were taken care of. I never knew, he said softly, genuine shock evident in his voice. I thought the insurance appeal went through. My mother's composure faltered momentarily before she recovered. Richard, I was protecting you from unnecessary stress during your recovery. Amanda offered to help. She has always been good with money management. It was a temporary solution. Temporary, I echoed, turning to another page in the binder. There's nothing temporary about $61,000, Mom. That's what I've given this family since I graduated. Not loaned, given. Because every time I asked about repayment, there was another crisis, another need, another reason why Sierra's opportunities couldn't wait, but mine had to. The dining room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a family heirloom my father had restored the summer before I left for college. I remembered watching him work on it, admiring his patience and care. I'd inherited that patience, that meticulous attention to detail. I'd thought it was a gift. Now I wondered if it was a curse. $61,000, Sierra repeated, her voice barely audible. She looked up at me, tears forming in her eyes. My car, my loans, my certification program, that was all you? I nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in my throat. Sierra turned to our mother, her expression hardening. You told me Dad's business partner helped with the certification program as an investment in my future. You said it was a grant. My mother's eyes darted between us, calculating her next move. I was trying to protect you both. Amanda had the means to help, and you had the potential to really make something of yourself. The casual cruelty of her words hung in the air between us. And I didn't? I asked quietly. I didn't have potential? That's not what I meant. My mother backpedaled. You've always been the practical one, the steady one. Sierra is the dreamer, the creative spirit. You both have your strengths. Stop it, Sierra said suddenly, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. Just stop it. Mom, do you even hear yourself? My father's hand trembled as he reached again for his wine glass, but his grip faltered. The glass tipped, red wine spilling across the white tablecloth like blood, before it hit the edge of the table and shattered on the hardwood floor below. No one moved to clean it up. The broken glass and spreading stain became a visual representation of what was happening to our family, the careful facade cracking, the mess beneath exposed for all to see. I never authorized these payments, my father said finally, looking up from the documents with eyes that had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Catherine, you told me we were managing. You told me the business was covering our expenses. We were managing, my mother insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. Amanda helped when things were tight. There's nothing wrong with family helping family. There's everything wrong with lying about it, I countered. With taking advantage. With making me believe Dad would lose his business or his health if I didn't step in, while simultaneously telling me I wasn't doing enough with my life compared to Sierra. My father turned to me, his expression devastated. Amanda, I had no idea. All these years, your mother handled the household finances. I focused on the business. The business that was supposedly failing every other month? I asked gently. Dad, when was the last time you actually looked at the company books yourself, not just the summaries Mom prepared? His face told me everything I needed to know. Sierra stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need some air, she announced, but instead of heading toward the patio doors, she walked to my side of the table. She hesitated, then bent down to hug me, the first genuine embrace we'd shared in years. I'm so sorry, she whispered against my hair. I didn't know. As she straightened and walked toward the front door, my mother called after her. Sierra, don't leave. We're celebrating your engagement. Sierra paused, her hand on the doorknob. There's nothing to celebrate right now, Mom. The door closed behind her with a decisive click. My mother turned to me, anger replacing her earlier composure. Are you satisfied now? You've ruined your sister's special night with your accounting and your accusations. This isn't about ruining anything, I said, closing the binder. It's about stopping the ruins I've been buried under while you built Sierra's life on top of them. The aftermath of truth has its own specific gravity, heavier than lies, yet somehow easier to bear. As I sat across from my parents in the dining room, the broken wine glass still untouched on the floor, I felt lighter than I had in years despite the tension thickening the air around us. My father had aged before my eyes, his shoulders curved inward as he methodically turned the pages of my binder, examining each transaction, each deception, each betrayal. His fingers trembled slightly, not from anger, but from a deep, fundamental shock that seemed to reverberate through his entire being. "These credit card charges," he said finally, pointing to a series of transactions. "These were made in my name, but I never authorized these." My mother's defensive posture had calcified into something brittle and dangerous. "Richard, you knew we were helping Sierra establish herself. You signed those application forms." "For one card with a $5,000 limit," my father countered, his voice uncharacteristically sharp. "Not for these amounts. And certainly not using Amanda's information as a cosigner without her knowledge." I hadn't known about that part until 6 months ago, when a collection agency called about a missed payment on a card I'd never seen. The subsequent investigation had revealed 3 credit accounts opened using my social security number and signature, forgeries authorized by my mother for family emergencies. "It wasn't like that," my mother insisted, though her typical certainty was fracturing around the edges. "Amanda agreed to help. With some things, yes," I acknowledged, "but not all of this. Not the cards you opened in my name, not the cash advances, not the second mortgage you told me Dad needed for the business, but actually used to pay for Sierra's trip to Italy and the down payment on her first apartment." My father's head snapped up. "What second mortgage?" The confusion in his eyes confirmed what I'd begun to suspect, that my mother's financial manipulations extended beyond what even I had documented, that the separate financial lives my parents had been leading might be more divided than anyone realized. "The one from last year," I said quietly. "Mom said you needed capital to expand the business, but the bank wouldn't approve a business loan because of the previous quarter's losses." My father shook his head slowly. "There were no losses last quarter. We've been profitable for 3 straight years, and I never took out a second mortgage." We both turned to my mother, whose face had gone very still, like a statue carefully balancing on a crumbling pedestal. "The business needed infusions that didn't show on the official books," she said carefully. "Tax purposes. Are you saying I've been committing tax fraud?" My father's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Of course not," my mother snapped. "I'm saying I protected this family, both of you girls and your father, by making difficult decisions when necessary. Someone had to be practical." "Practical?" I repeated. "Is that what you are call draining my savings account? Forging my signature? Lying to all of us?" "I call it survival," my mother shot back. "Your father's business was failing when you were in college. We nearly lost everything. I did what I had to do to keep this family afloat, to give both my daughters opportunities." "Catherine," my father interrupted, "the business had one bad quarter 15 years ago. We recovered within 6 months." The silence that followed was deafening. "Then where did the money go?" I asked finally, voicing the question that hung heavy in the air between us. My mother's perfectly manicured nails tapped against the table in a nervous rhythm I'd never seen from her before. "Investments," she said vaguely. "Necessary expenses. The lifestyle we all benefited from." "The lifestyle you and Sierra benefited from," I corrected gently. "Dad was working 70-hour weeks. I was living paycheck to paycheck in a studio apartment with a roommate. This wasn't about family survival. This was about appearances." The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 times, the sound oddly comforting in its predictable rhythm. Outside, I could hear Sierra's voice, presumably on the phone, with Bradley, explaining why the celebration dinner had imploded. My father closed the binder and pushed his chair back from the table. He looked older than his 62 years, the lines around his eyes deeper than I'd ever noticed before. "I need to see the household accounts," he said quietly. "All of them. Tonight." My mother's expression flickered between defiance and fear. "This isn't the time, Richard. We have guests. We have our daughter," he corrected, gesturing toward me. "Our daughter, who has apparently been supporting this family while we—" He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "While you told me I wasn't doing enough with my life," I finished for him. "While you compared me unfavorably to Sierra at every opportunity. While you made me believe I was somehow failing because I couldn't afford the lifestyle you all seem to manage so easily." My mother stood abruptly. "I will not be vilified in my own home for doing what mothers have done since the beginning of time. Protecting my family, making hard choices, sacrificing." "What exactly did you sacrifice, Mom?" I asked, my voice steady despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I was the sacrifice. The front door opened and closed, and Sierra walked back into the dining room. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her expression was resolute. She sat down next to me, reaching under the table to squeeze my hand. "Bradley's coming to pick me up," she announced, "and I've decided I'm not taking the job in New York." "What?" My mother's shock was palpable. "Sierra, this is your dream opportunity. You can't throw it away because of Amanda's financial concerns." Sierra shook her head. "This isn't about Amanda's concerns. This is about the fact that my entire career has been built on my sister's sacrifices I didn't even know about." She turned to me, her eyes filled with a new awareness. "I'm so sorry, Amanda. I had no idea. All these years, I thought I was just lucky, or talented, or deserving somehow." "You are talented," I said softly. "That's never been in question. But I'm not more deserving than you," she insisted. "And I can't keep taking and taking when I never knew the true cost." The doorbell rang, shattering the tense silence that had fallen over the dining room. Sierra stood to answer it, presumably for Bradley, but my father raised his hand. "Let me," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority I hadn't heard in years. As he left the room, my mother turned to Sierra, her expression a calculated blend of hurt and manipulation. "Sierra, darling, you can't possibly be serious about declining the Vogue position. This is everything you've worked for." Sierra glanced at me before responding. "Is it what I worked for, Mom? Or what was handed to me while Amanda paid the bills?" She shook her head. "I need time to process this, to figure out what parts of my life are actually mine." My mother scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. Amanda helped out occasionally, yes, but your achievements are your own." "The certification that got me my current job cost $12,000, Sierra countered. "That's not helping out occasionally. That's a fundamental investment that made everything else possible." I hadn't expected Sierra to defend me. Throughout our lives, she had accepted our mother's narrative without question, that I was the reliable but unexceptional daughter, while she was destined for greatness. Hearing her acknowledge the truth felt like the first real connection we'd had in, years. Voices drifted in from the foyer, my father's low rumble and a younger man's confused responses. A moment later, Dad returned with Bradley, whose perfectly tailored suit and carefully styled hair seemed jarringly out of place amid our family's unraveling. "Sorry I'm late," Bradley announced, his confident smile faltering as he registered the tension in the room. His eyes fell to the wine. "Stain and broken glass. Did I miss something?" Sierra stood and crossed to him, placing a hand on his arm. "Bradley, I need to postpone our celebration. Something important has come up with my family." Bradley's eyes darted between all of us, clearly trying to assess the situation. "Of course, whatever you need. Is everyone okay?" "No," my father answered simply. "We're not." My mother rose, gracefully, slipping back into her role as the perfect hostess despite the chaos swirling around her. "Bradley, I'm so sorry for the confusion. We've had a bit of a family discussion that needs to continue privately. Perhaps we can reschedule for next weekend?" Bradley nodded, still looking confused. "Sure, Mrs. Carter, no problem at all." He turned to Sierra. "Do you want me to stay, or—" "I'll call you tomorrow," Sierra promised, kissing his cheek. "I just need tonight to be with my family." After Sierra walked Bradley out, an uncomfortable silence descended once more. My father remained standing, his hand resting on the back of his chair as if he needed the support. "I think," he said carefully, "that we need to have a family meeting. In my study. Now." My mother's eyes narrowed. "Richard, it's been a long evening. Perhaps we should all take some time to calm down and discuss this tomorrow with clearer heads." "No," my father said firmly. "No more delays. No more secrets." He looked at me, regret etched deeply in the lines around his eyes. "Amanda, I owe you an apology that can never be adequate. But before I can even begin to make amends, I need to understand exactly what's happened here." As we filed into my father's study, a room that had always been something of a sanctuary in our home, I felt a strange sense of unreality. For years, I had carried the burden of my family's financial secrets alone, convinced that speaking up would make me the villain. Now, watching my father unlock his desk drawer with hands that weren't quite steady, I wondered if silence had been the greater betrayal. To him, to Sierra, and to myself. Dad pulled out several folders and laid them on his desk, then unlocked a small safe hidden behind a false panel in his bookshelf. From it, he retrieved a USB drive and another set of files. Catherine, he said, his voice controlled but tight with anger. I want to see all the household accounts, the mortgage statements, the credit card, bills, everything. This is ridiculous, my mother protested. I've managed our household finances for 30 years. Are you questioning my competence now because Amanda has some misguided concerns? $61,000 isn't a misguided concern, Sierra interjected, having returned from seeing Bradley out. And from what I just heard, there might be even more that Amanda doesn't know about. My mother's gaze hardened as she looked at Sierra. I expected more loyalty from you, of all people. This isn't about loyalty, Sierra replied. It's about truth. My father opened his laptop and inserted the USB drive. I keep backups of all the business financials here, he explained, more to me and Sierra than to our mother. Catherine has been telling me for years that she reconciles these with our personal accounts, but now I need to see for myself. As he pulled up spreadsheets and documents, my mother remained standing by the door, her arms crossed defensively across her chest. The perfect makeup and elegant attire that had always been her armor now seemed like a costume, beautiful but hollow. Mom, I said quietly, why did you do it? Really? She glanced at me, then away. You wouldn't understand. Try me, she sighed, a sound filled with exasperation rather than remorse. When your father's business struggled during the recession, we nearly lost everything. The house, the cars, our standing in the community. I promised myself then that we would never be vulnerable again, that my daughters would have every advantage I could secure for them. But Dad says the business recovered. Quickly, I pointed out. The business recovered. Our savings didn't. Our safety net was gone. Her voice took on a harder edge. And then there was you and Sierra. So different, with such different needs and potentials. Sierra needed connections, opportunities, the right schools, the right internships. You were always more independent. Independent or overlooked? I asked. My father made a sudden sound, something between a gasp and a curse. We all turned to find him staring at his computer screen, his face drained of color. Catherine, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. There's a second mortgage on our house for $175,000, taken out 3 years ago. He looked up at her, bewildered. I never signed this. My mother's composure slipped for the first time that evening. A flash of genuine fear crossed her face before she recovered. You were busy with the expansion. I handled it. You forged my signature, he stated flatly, just like you did with Amanda's. I did what was necessary, she snapped. The money was for investments. What investments? My father demanded. Because it didn't go into our joint accounts, and it certainly didn't go into the business. My mother's silence was damning. Sierra had moved to stand behind my father, looking at the screen over his shoulder. Dad, she said softly, check the dates on this second mortgage against my tuition payments and my apartment purchase. My father's fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, pulling up more documents. I watched his expression change from confusion to shock, to a deep, penetrating hurt. The money trail, he said finally, looking up at my mother. It goes to Sierra's tuition, her apartment down payment, her car, and a brokerage account in your name only, currently valued at just over $90,000. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother stood straighter, lifting her chin in the defiant gesture I'd seen countless times throughout my childhood. I was securing our family's future, she said, making investments that would benefit all of us eventually. By stealing from me? I asked. By stealing from all of us, my father corrected, his voice hollow. The forgery, the hidden accounts. Catherine, how could you? My mother's facade finally cracked completely. How could I not? She demanded, her voice rising. Look at what we've built, Richard. The life we have. The status, Sierra's opportunities. Someone had to make the hard choices. And Amanda was the price? Sierra asked, tears streaming down her face. My success at the cost of my sister's future? That was your hard choice? The study clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed Sierra's question. Outside, through the partially open window, I could hear the distant sounds of a neighbor's dinner party. Laughter and music that seemed to belong to another universe entirely. My mother moved to the leather armchair in the corner of the study and sank into it, suddenly looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. For a moment, I glimpsed something beneath her perfect exterior, something frightened and desperate that had been hidden away for decades. You don't understand what it's like, she said, finally, her voice uncharacteristically fragile. To come from nothing. To be overlooked. To be told you're not enough. I understand perfectly, I replied quietly. Her eyes met mine, and for perhaps the first time, she actually saw me. Not the reliable daughter she could count on. Not the plain counterpoint to Sierra's sparkle, but a person. A woman who had been carrying the weight of secrets and sacrifices for years. I grew up with nothing, my mother continued, speaking more to herself than to us. My father drank away every paycheck. My mother cleaned houses to keep food on the table. I wore hand-me-downs and thrift store clothes. I was smart, smarter than most of the girls in my class, but it didn't matter because I didn't have the right name, the right clothes, the right connections. My father was watching her with an expression I couldn't quite read, a mixture of anger, compassion, and profound disappointment. I swore my daughters would never know that feeling, she continued. Never wonder if they were good enough. Never be excluded because they couldn't afford to keep up. But that's exactly what happened to me, I said gently. I've been living paycheck to paycheck, watching Sierra get everything while I got gratitude, at best, criticism, more often. Sierra moved to sit on the arm of my chair, her hand finding mine. Mom, do you even hear what you're saying? You did to Amanda exactly what was done to you. My mother's perfect posture crumpled slightly. It wasn't the same. Amanda is strong, capable. She doesn't need the external validation that you needed, my father finished. That you still need? The question hung in the air between them. 35 years of marriage suddenly illuminated by a harsh new understanding. Richard, my mother began, but he cut her off with a raised hand. I loved you for your ambition, he said quietly, for your determination to build something meaningful. I never realized that something was an illusion, built on lies and theft. It wasn't theft, she insisted. It was reallocation. For our family. Except Amanda wasn't included in that vision of family, was she? My father pressed. She was the resource, not the beneficiary. My mother had no answer for that. She looked down at her hands, at the diamond ring that had been upgraded 3 times during their marriage. Each time, I now realized, coinciding with a temporary financial setback that had required my assistance. I need to know everything, my father said, turning back to his computer. Every account, every transaction, every lie. For the next hour, we pieced together the complex web of financial manipulation my mother had constructed over the years. The second mortgage had indeed gone partially towards Sierra's expenses, but a significant portion had been diverted to a separate investment account in my mother's name only. There were credit cards I'd never known about, loans taken against my father's life insurance policy, even a small business registered in my name, a consulting company that had apparently been used to funnel money between accounts. As each new deception came to light, my mother offered justifications that grew increasingly hollow. The defiance in her posture gradually gave way to resignation as she realized that this time, there would be no smoothing things over, no redirecting the conversation, no blaming my jealousy or lack of ambition for the fractures in our family. Sierra left the room briefly and returned with 3 cups of coffee, handing one to me and one to our father. None for our mother. A small but pointed omission that didn't go unnoticed. What happens now? Sierra asked, perching on the edge of my father's desk. Dad rubbed his eyes, fatigue evident in every line of his face. Legally, we need to address the identity theft and fraud. The accounts in Amanda's name, the forged signatures, those are crimes, not just family matters. My mother's head snapped up. You would press charges against your wife? The mother of your children? I don't know, my father admitted, looking at me. That's not my decision to make. All eyes turned to me, and I felt the weight of expectations once again, but different this time. Not the expectation that I would sacrifice, would give, would remain silent for the family's benefit, but the expectation that I would decide what justice looked like in this moment. I don't want charges, I said finally. I want restitution, and the truth. Amanda, my father began, but I shook my head. I mean it, Dad. I don't want to see Mom in legal trouble, but I want every penny returned with interest. I want my credit restored, and I want everyone in this family to acknowledge what happened. I turned to my mother. No more gaslighting. No more telling me I'm jealous or unambitious or less worthy of investment than Sierra. Sierra squeezed my shoulder. I'll help. Whatever you need, whatever you want paid back, I'll contribute. This isn't your debt to repay, I told her. Maybe not legally, she acknowledged. But morally, I benefited from what was taken from you. I want to make it right. My mother watched this exchange with an unreadable expression. Then, unexpectedly, she stood and walked to the built-in bar in the corner of the study. She poured herself a generous measure of scotch, my father's scotch, an expensive single malt he saved for special occasions, and drank half of it in one swallow. "You want the truth, Amanda?" she asked, her voice rough from the alcohol. "The truth is that you remind me too much of myself, the self I worked so hard to escape. Practical, reliable, invisible." She took another sip. Sierra was my do-over, my chance to create the life I should have had. The admission hung in the air between us, breathtaking in its cruelty and its honesty. "And that justified stealing from me?" I asked quietly. "Nothing justifies what I did," she replied, surprising me with her directness. "But you asked for the truth, and there it is. I saw myself in you, and I hated it." A strange sort of silence fell over the study after my mother's confession. The truth, raw and unvarnished, had a weight to it that pressed down on all of us. I looked at her standing there with my father's expensive scotch in her hand, designer clothes on her body, and decades of deception etched into the careful lines of her face, and felt something unexpected. Pity. "I never wanted to be like you either," I said finally. "Not because of where you came from, but because of what you became trying to escape it." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. My father closed his laptop slowly. "It's late. We all need time to process this." His voice sounded aged, worn down by revelations that had fundamentally altered his understanding of his life, his marriage, his family. "Amanda, will you stay tonight? There's more to discuss, but perhaps in the morning when we're clearer." I shook my head. "I need space, Dad. I'll come back tomorrow." I gathered my binder and stood up. 9 o'clock? He nodded, looking relieved to have a concrete plan amid the chaos. 9 o'clock. Sierra followed me, out of the study, leaving our parents behind. In the dining room, the broken wine glass still lay on the floor, the red stain now dried into the wood and the white tablecloth. It struck me as the perfect metaphor for our family. The beautiful surface irreparably damaged, the underlying structure permanently stained. "I'll drive you home," Sierra offered, her voice subdued. "I don't think you should be alone right now." "I've been alone for years," I replied, not unkindly. "Tonight won't be any different." She winced. "Amanda, please, let me do this one small thing for you." I studied my sister's face. The perfect features that had graced family photos and social media posts, always positioned front and center while I lingered in the background. But tonight, her makeup was smudged from crying, her expression stripped of the confident glow our mother had so carefully cultivated. She looked younger somehow, more real. "Okay," I agreed, "but just the drive. I need time to think." The cool night air felt cleansing as we stepped outside. Sierra's Tesla beeped as she unlocked it, and I slid into the passenger seat, acutely aware that my contribution to this vehicle had been more than either of us had realized. We drove in silence for several minutes, the familiar streets of River Oaks giving way to more modest neighborhoods as we approached my apartment complex. Finally, Sierra spoke. "I've been thinking about the Vogue job," she said, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I'm going to decline it." "Sierra, no, let me finish," she interrupted. "It's not just because of tonight. I've, been feeling hollow, like I'm living someone else's dream. Mom's dream." She glanced at me briefly. "Did you know I originally wanted to study marine biology in college?" I shook my head, surprised. "You never mentioned it." "Mom said it wasn't practical, that there was no future in it." Sierra's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "She said fashion was where I could really shine, where I had natural talent. And maybe she was right, but I never got to find out for myself. Every major decision in my life has been guided by her vision, not mine." I understood then that Sierra had been a victim too, in a different way, but no less real. While I had been exploited financially, she had been molded into a living manifestation of our mother's thwarted ambitions, her authentic self, buried beneath layers of carefully curated perfection. "What will you do instead?" I asked. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. "I'm not sure yet, but I want to figure it out for myself." She pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building and turned to face me. "Amanda, I know an apology isn't enough, but I am sorry. So deeply sorry. I didn't know what was happening, but I should have questioned things more. Should have seen that something wasn't right." "You were a kid when it started," I reminded her. "We both were. But we're not kids anymore. She reached for my hand. I want to make this right, not just the money, though I'll help with that too, but our relationship. I've missed my sister. The sincerity in her voice touched something in me that had been walled off for years. I've missed you too, I admitted. The real you, not the perfect projection Mom created. We sat in silence for a moment, both processing the seismic shifts that had occurred in a single evening. Finally, I reached for my door handle. 9 o'clock tomorrow, I said. Dad's study. We'll figure out the financial part then. Sierra nodded. I'll be there. She hesitated. Amanda? Thank you. For being brave enough to speak the truth. It couldn't have been easy. I thought about the years of silence, the careful record-keeping, the gradual awakening to the exploitation that had shaped my adult life. It wasn't, I agreed, but living the lie was harder. That night, alone in my modest apartment, I sat on my secondhand couch and scrolled through old family photos on my phone. Images of Sierra's graduation, her first fashion show, her 25th birthday party in Cabo, all events that had been celebrated with expensive dinners and lavish gifts. In the background of several photos, I could see myself, always slightly out of focus, always partially cropped out of frame. The reliable one, the invisible one. I paused on one particular photo from Christmas 3 years ago. My mother was wearing the pearl necklace I had given her, the one purchase I'd made for myself that I'd instead gifted to her after she'd admired it in a store window. In the picture, she was beaming at Sierra, who was showing off the designer watch our parents had given her. I was nowhere to be seen in the image because I'd been the one taking the photo. A text message from an unknown number lit up my screen, breaking my reverie. It was from Bradley, Sierra's fiancé. Sierra told me what happened. I had no idea. For what it's worth, I've always thought you were the most genuine person in your family. If there's anything I can do, please let me know. The message surprised me. Bradley and I had never been close, our interactions limited to polite small talk at family gatherings. I hadn't expected him to reach out, much less to offer support. Another text followed. Also, Sierra is staying at my place tonight. She's pretty shaken up, but determined to make things right. I've never seen this side of her before. It's like she's waking up from something. I typed back a simple response. Thank you, Bradley. Take care of her. His reply came quickly. I will. And Amanda? From one financial person to another, I'd be happy to help you figure out the restitution plan tomorrow. I work with fraud cases sometimes at the firm. I hadn't known that about him. Like so many things in my family, the details of Bradley's life and career had been filtered through my mother's selective narrative. In her telling, he was simply the perfect catch from the right family with the right connections, a male version of what she'd molded Sierra to be. I appreciate that, I replied. 9 a.m. at my parents' house, if you can make it. As I set my phone down, I realized I was exhausted, not just from the events of the evening, but from years of carrying a burden that had never been mine to bear. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, calculating exact figures, establishing repayment plans, rebuilding trust that had been shattered beyond easy repair. But for tonight, I had done enough. The truth was out. The silence was broken. And for the first time in years, I slept deeply, without the weight of secrets pressing down on my chest. The morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through my bedroom window with an intensity that seemed almost deliberate, as if the universe wanted to ensure that today, unlike so many days before, everything would be illuminated. I dressed carefully in a simple blue dress I'd bought on sale last season. Nothing flashy, nothing expensive, but mine, paid for with my own money, chosen by my own taste. As I fastened my grandmother's silver locket around my neck, the one gift from my mother I was certain had no hidden strings attached, I caught my reflection in the mirror and saw something new in my eyes. Determination, yes, but also a quiet dignity I hadn't allowed myself before. My phone buzzed with a text from Sierra. Bradley's coming with me this morning. Hope that's okay. He has experience with financial restitution planning. I smiled slightly, remembering his offer from the night before. Already spoke with him. It's fine. Another text followed. Immediately, Dad called. Mom's sister is coming too, Aunt Valerie. Apparently Dad called her last night. That was unexpected. Aunt Valerie lived in Chicago and rarely visited. She and my mother had a complicated relationship, cordial on the surface but strained underneath. I'd always sensed that Valerie saw through my mother's carefully constructed facade, which made her presence at family gatherings infrequent and tense. When I arrived at my parents' house, The driveway was already full. Sierra's Tesla, Bradley's Audi, and an unfamiliar rental car that I assumed belonged to Aunt Valerie. I parked on the street and took a deep breath before walking to the front door. Uncle Frank was waiting on the porch, surprising me. "Your dad called me too," he explained, giving me a gentle hug. "Thought you might want some additional support." Warmth spread through my chest at his thoughtfulness. Frank had always been the one relative who seemed to see me clearly, who asked about my work with genuine interest, who remembered my birthday without prompting, who never compared me unfavorably to Sierra. "Thank you," I whispered against his shoulder. Inside, the house felt different. The usual. Pristine order had given way to a subtle dishevelment. Cushions slightly askew, breakfast dishes still in the sink, family photos that usually stood in perfect alignment now tilted at odd angles, as if someone had been examining them and hastily replacing them. My father greeted us in the foyer, his face haggard but his eyes clearer than they'd been the night before. "Everyone's in the study," he said, hugging me briefly. "Catherine, your mother, has been up all night, going through records. Well, you'll see." The study had been transformed overnight. The large mahogany desk was now covered with folders, bank statements, and printed spreadsheets, all organized into neat stacks. A whiteboard had been brought in from my father's home office and propped against the bookshelves, covered in figures and calculations in my mother's precise handwriting. And there was my mother, sitting ramrod straight in the desk chair, her appearance shockingly different from the polished perfection I was accustomed to seeing. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face bare of makeup, her designer clothes replaced by a plain blouse and slacks that I'd never seen before. Aunt Valerie stood by the window, a tall, elegant woman whose resemblance to my mother was striking. The same bone structure, the same eyes, but a more natural bearing, a face lined by genuine smiles rather than strategic charm. Sierra and Bradley sat together on the leather sofa, their heads bent over a laptop. They looked up when I entered, Sierra's smile tentative but warm. "Amanda," my mother said, her voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "You're here. Good. We can begin." For the next 3 hours, we worked methodically through the financial web my mother had woven over the years. With Bradley's professional expertise and my accounting background, we traced every transaction, documented every debt, calculated interest and penalties, and created a comprehensive plan for restitution. The total was staggering. $143,000 when everything was tallied, including the identity theft, unauthorized credit accounts, and funds diverted from my father's business that should have been rightfully mine. "I've already liquidated my personal investment account," my mother announced when we reached the final figure. "That covers $94,000. The remaining amount will come from selling my jewelry collection and art pieces that belong solely to me." I stared at her, stunned by this unexpected practicality, this apparent acceptance of responsibility. "Catherine," my father began, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "No, Richard, this is necessary." She turned to me, her expression unfamiliar, humbled, perhaps, or simply stripped of its usual performance. "Amanda, I know this doesn't erase what I've done, but it's a start." "What prompted this?" I asked, gesturing to the meticulous organization, the ready solutions, the absence of the defensive posturing I'd expected. Aunt Valerie stepped forward. "I showed her the consequences," she said simply, "legal and otherwise. But more importantly, I reminded her of our mother, of what it was like to be constantly diminished, constantly overlooked." She glanced at my mother. We both escaped the same household, but we chose different paths. My mother's eyes dropped to her hands. "I became what I hated," she admitted softly, "and I didn't even see it happening." The room fell silent. This vulnerability from my mother was so unfamiliar that none of us seemed to know how to respond. Finally, Sierra broke the silence. "I've made a decision," she announced. "I'm declining the Vogue position, as I told Amanda last night, and I'm moving out of my apartment. Bradley and I are postponing our wedding plans while I figure out what I actually want, not what I've been told to want." My mother's head snapped up, alarm flashing across her face. "Sierra, don't be hasty. Your career is built on Amanda's sacrifices," Sierra finished firmly. "I need to build something of my own now." Bradley nodded, his arm around Sierra's shoulders. "We've talked it through. Sierra needs space to discover her authentic self." He looked at me. "And we both want to help make things right for Amanda." My father cleared his throat. "There's one more thing," he said. pulling a document from a folder. Amanda, this is the deed to a small property I own in Seattle. It was an investment I made years ago, separate from the family finances. Catherine doesn't have access to it. He slid the paper across the desk toward me. It's yours now. A fresh start if you want it. I looked down at the deed, stunned. Dad, I can't. You can, he insisted. It's worth about twice what was taken from you. Consider it back interest, and an apology for my blindness all these years. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new Seattle townhouse, watching rain patter against the wide windows that overlooked Puget Sound. The property my father had gifted me had been sold, and the proceeds used to purchase this place. Small but perfect, with enough room for my growing consulting business and a spare bedroom for visitors. My phone chimed with a video call from Sierra. When I answered, her face filled the screen, suntanned and relaxed in a way I'd never seen before. How's the marine biology program? I asked, smiling at her obvious excitement. Amazing. Today we tracked dolphin migrations and collected water samples. Her camera panned to show a research vessel docked in clear blue waters. The Galapagos is everything I dreamed it would be. After our family's reckoning, Sierra had applied for a volunteer position with a marine research team, fulfilling the dream she'd abandoned years ago at our mother's insistence. Bradley had been supportive, agreeing to a longer engagement while she explored this passion. The woman on my screen bore little resemblance to the perfectly polished sister I'd grown up with. Her hair was sun-streaked and casual, her face makeup-free, her eyes alive with genuine purpose. And how are Mom and Dad? I asked. Sierra's expression grew more serious. Dad's good. The business is thriving now that he's fully back in control. Mom, she hesitated. Mom's trying. The therapy seems to be helping. She asked for your new address again. Said she has something she wants to send you. I nodded, still cautious about reestablishing contact with my mother. Our relationship remained fragile, our interactions limited to occasional phone calls that were cordial but restrained. The years of manipulation couldn't be undone in months, but there were small signs of genuine change. Her willingness to seek therapy, her decision to sell most of her designer possessions, her careful respect of the boundaries I'd established. You can give it to her, I said finally. But no visits yet, I'm not ready. Sierra nodded, understanding. One day at a time, right? Hey, I gotta go. We're heading back out for evening observations. Love you, sis. Love you too, I replied, smiling as the screen went dark. Later that evening, as I worked on a new client proposal, an email notification popped up on my laptop. It was from Uncle Frank, with a photo attachment. I opened it to find an image of the family dining room at my parents' house, specifically the hardwood floor where my father's wine glass had shattered that fateful night. The wine stain was gone, the floorboards sanded and refinished. But rather than trying to make it look untouched, my father had employed a Japanese technique called kintsugi, the art of repairing broken things. With gold, highlighting the damage rather than concealing it. The repaired section gleamed with gold-filled seams, beautiful in its honesty about having been broken. Frank's message was simple. Richard did this himself, said it was a reminder that broken things can be mended, but the repair should honor the break, not pretend it never happened. I traced the golden lines on my screen with my fingertip, feeling something shift and settle within me. The truth had indeed broken us, but in that breaking, something authentic had been revealed, something that could be rebuilt with care and intention, stronger at the mended places. You can love your family and still walk away from their manipulation. You can set boundaries and still be kind. And sometimes, choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's the only way to become who you were always meant to be.